This week's episode is brought to you by an initiative made possible thanks to the support of ICEX-Invest in Spain, and it is financed by the Spanish government's New Generation Plan. When thinking of where in the world to shoot your next film or TV series, Spain may be your next cinematic paradise. With tax incentives of up to 30% on qualified spend, Spain is a complete production ecosystem offering world-class studios, a dynamic range of locations, and highly skilled crews. The infrastructure, the tapas, and the sangria makes Spain the ultimate destination for your next project. Spain, making it easy for you. Take two, here we go. We embrace the messy. We embrace the imperfect. We're all doing our best, and we got to give grace for the days where we show up not firing at all cylinders, because we've all been there. And that I'm talking about myself, for those who are like, what is she talking about? Thank you for being here. It's such an honor and a treat to talk to you, because we actually are in the same organization that's sort of not an official organization, but should be, called the Women's Production Society, which homes all of the brilliant minds of the female physical production execs all over the industry, across studios, production companies, you name it, they're there. And what started, from what I understand, as a small gathering of women has now grown to over 200 of us, primarily based in the US. But I think it's so incredible that, because you're part of the steering committee, you're part of the original.
Yeah, I am
the
part
original
of the original 8, maybe
the
10.
Ocean's 8.
It was before streamers existed. So each studio at the time had one female as a production executive. So we gathered together and started a supportive group for women, production executives, and started to share our resources. And
it was started like as a dinner with 8 women, just being like, how do we help each other?
Exactly. And oh gosh, I'm having flashbacks of those dinners. And it was very cathartic to be able to meet every quarter or more often with a group of women who do the same job as you do, which is be the only female production executive at a studio, and just be a source of support and also a wonderful resource. And now, as you said, we've grown to 200, which is incredible. So it still is consists of female production executives or former executives like myself that are now freelance producers. It's like I said, a wonderful resource where you can tap into from anything from looking for a script supervisor in Thailand to references, which are done, carefully, as they always should be. It's a great time saver, and it's a very supportive resource.
Yeah, and it's also, the information is also being funneled through the lens that we all operate and live in. So that when a woman or any physical production exec or producer is giving you a recommend, that they have thought through and or experienced the same questions you're going to have.
Exactly.
So it's not like if your brother's like, I worked with this random thing over here, and you're like, okay, but they don't speak the same language that we speak, and so it mitigates a lot of that time that you have to spend doing a lot of that legwork. And I think we're so siloed sometimes in our jobs, especially coming up on the physical side. I came up as a line producer, as a UPM, and so sometimes you don't really get to share space with women or anyone who does that job, because it's one person who gets hired. So to get to sit in a room or on a member, board with others and sharing and learning each other's experiences and how they've dealt with this problem, or how they budget this, or how they look at that, is so great to have that support. Because again, one person typically gets the job. It's not like you work with a team.
Exactly.
You have your team, your production team, but they're not doing the same job as you are. I had the privilege once, a line producer friend hired me to be her supervisor years after I had been supervising. And she's like, I know this is beneath you, but can you come do this? And I was like, oh my God, I would love nothing more than to come be your right hand and see how you do the job, because I get to learn from you in that way, understanding the nuances and seeing the similarities. We just don't get access to that very often. And so I think it's super great that there's such a supportive community of women who are here to help us all like rise up and or stay the course, even though, a lot of us are now pivoting back to freelance as production is doing what it does and becoming even more globalized, which we'll get to.
That's another great resource for freelance producers executives are looking for people who have shot, say, in the Middle East, and they have a project that is scripted for the Middle East, and you post something on our website, and within, moments, you have people who have either shot there or know people who have shot there, and what companies they've worked with, what crew they've worked with, and within just a short amount of time, you're way ahead of where you would have been without this group. So.
Yeah, it's truly remarkable. So thank you for starting that dinner, being at that dinner many years ago, and now we get to sit here at Netflix's offices and get to talk to you and learn a little bit about your journey. So thanks for being here. It's really special.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I'd love to take us to the beginning. How did you find this career path?
I love movies growing up. I did not study film in college. I majored in volleyball and went to UC Santa Barbara to play volleyball and math. I was actually a nanny for the president of ABC, Brandon Stoddard, and he introduced me to the world of movie making and television series. He was actually producing Roots and Charlie's Angels and Love Boat. And I would take the girls who were only a few years younger than me to sets, and that was my first exposure to the business. And after college, I was looking for something in film or entertainment, and I saw a job listing for an intern at David Geffen's company. David Geffen had a very successful music company, and he had just started in film and made a little movie, his first movie called Risky Business, and that put him on the movie map. And then he did Little Shop of Horrors.
Wow.
I graduated from an intern to an assistant for a producer, Linda Opes, who sadly just recently passed away.
Rest in peace.
And I brought Linda a script. I had no idea what I was doing, but somebody I was dating gave me a script and said, "Don't reveal your source." So I brought it to Linda, and the next Monday morning, I was at the Xerox machine, and David Geffen came in, and he said, "Are you Sarah, the intern?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I just bought the script you brought for $500,000, and now we're going to make you an assistant." So that's how I got my first job.
Okay, no big deal.
I didn't know anything. Like, I could have attached myself as a producer, but I don't know, I was 23 years old.
Yeah.
So I was thrilled to be made
So did you think that that's how it was going to be from there on out? You were just going to eventually date a bunch of people who were going to give you scripts, and you're just gonna,
I did, but it didn't work out that way.
Because that's how it happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Right place, the right time.
Right place, for everybody.
True. So the first few years was in development, reading scripts and organizing Linda Opes' life. And she went to Paramount and partnered with another wonderful producer, Deborah Hill. And I got a taste of production when they were going to make the sequel to Flashdance. Really dating myself here. And Paramount decided not to make it, but I decided to stick with the director and leave Linda, and I went to work for a director and went on my first movie in North Carolina. And as I have said, I teach at UCLA, which we can talk about at some point today, but I often say to my students, when you get on a production, you'll know you're either bitten by the bug or you're not. And I was bitten, and I knew that's what I wanted to do is work my way up the ladder to become a line producer. So I did that. I worked on a number of films, starting as an assistant, and then assistant coordinator and production manager, production supervisor, and line producer. And did a lot of movie. I did an independent film as a producer called Killing Zoe, which was the crew from Reservoir Dogs. They just finished shooting, and Quentin Tarantino's partner, Roger Avery, was directing a $2 million movie called Killing Zoe, and we shot it in LA. It was about a bank robbery in Paris, and we found a shut down bank in downtown LA and shot it in downtown LA, and then went to Paris and stole all our exterior shots.
It's so funny, right? And now we go to Paris for LA.
It's
right?
True, right?
Yeah, I mean, the substance is all shot there. True. It's crazy how that's changed.
Anyway, so I worked my way in production, did a number of films at Warner Brothers, my favorite experience was working on The Bodyguard. And I did a few films with Kevin Costner. I did Wyatt Earp, and I did another movie that that his partner produced, called Head Above Water in Maine. So at that point, I think Head Above Water was my last freelance movie at the time. I became a single mom with a 1 and a 3-year-old.
Wow.
And I realized I can't keep traveling around the country and world with 2 little babies. And I thought, well, I have to become a production executive, which I honestly dreaded because my perception was that the studio just stood there and said no. But I knew it would keep me in town most of the time. And I thought it was a 3-year contract. So I thought I'll stay 1 contract and then try to figure it out.
And was that an easy transition to make at that time in terms of the network that you had and being freelance and rising up the production ladder to then go, all right, I want to be an executive? Was it as simple as, like, how did you make that transition? How did you find the right opportunity for yourself?
I was working as a consultant for HBO. They didn't need an executive, but they hired me to kind of help the executives put together plans. And I was actively looking for an executive job for the reasons I just stated. And I heard that somebody was leaving Paramount Pictures. And I thought, I called a friend of mine who was an executive there, and I said, confidentially, this person's leaving. Will you let me know when that shoe is dropped so I can try to slide in there? And she helped me get the interview. It was very intimidating, just because I didn't really know what to expect. I knew I was very comfortable about the making of movies, but it was the what I found daunting was the politics. But like anything, once you get used to it, it was very comfortable.
So you said just now that, like, the world that we've come up in, you're on the ground making the movie. So to keep with that metaphor, then what is the studio executive doing? Because they're not making the movie, you're hiring the people to make the movie for you. So what is their part in the ecosystem?
The production executives. So the creative executives will give the production executive a script and often a number that they want to make it for. And it's the production executive's job to come up with a plan that will, hit the number that's reasonable, putting the plan together by hiring a line producer, sometimes an AD to do the schedule. Depending on the size of the script, will help depend on how early you bring people on to help formulate the plan. And once you have a plan, you wait for a green light, and then the fun part begins, which is, helping casting, as I say, casting the team of the line producer and the production designer and cinematographer, and meeting with the filmmakers and helping the director put his vision on screen, the director and the producer's vision on screen. And then once the plan is formulated, you execute it with the filmmakers. And I think because of my freelance experience coming into the studio, I became very involved in the movies I worked on. Not quite in the weeds, but pretty close to the weeds, because I enjoyed it. And it helped me do my job. And I think it also helped me relate to filmmakers, since I'd spent a number of years working in the freelance world.
Would you say that to become a physical studio executive, you have to come up with that set experience? Or have you ever encountered someone who operates or occupies that job, but maybe hasn't had as much on-set experience?
It's a good question. Like I said, I think it was very handy, the tools I learned in production, and what I really needed to learn was the politics. There are many executives who have not worked even as a production assistant in production as a production executive, and they have worked only within the studio system, starting as an assistant. And some studios will graduate assistants to or promote assistants to executives. And I was at Paramount, and that was a studio that did, which was also really wonderful, because everyone's working really hard for the same goal. And the assistants know that they may have an opportunity to become a junior executive and then an executive. And that happened with a handful of my assistants. So to answer your question is, I think it's very helpful, but it's not necessarily required. For the executives that started in the system as assistants, absolutely are more familiar with the politics and also seeing the projects from a higher 30,000 point, 30,000 foot, perspective, as opposed to someone like me who did tend to see it from and learn to see it from the 30,000 foot view, but also enjoyed looking at it from the 6-inch perspective.
Same. I mean, I think when I was an executive, that was definitely the challenge for me, is how do I go from the micro to the macro, because I love the micro so much, but I also love the macro. I love getting to zoom out and see the big picture of everything that you're building and working towards. But it was interesting for me to realize that not a lot of people operate in both those spaces. Some people are really, really good at just a micro, and some are really, really good at the macro, but they don't have that like interchangeability that I found that I enjoyed both of those spaces, which sounds like you do as well. So
I do. And for me, the satisfaction, both freelance, but it became more tangible as a studio executive of getting a 120-page script and working on it for, say, a year and ending up with a movie. And to me, that's the thrill and the joy of being an executive, but even more so as a producer.
Yeah. So, okay, so then you have your babies and you go become an executive.
So I become an executive, and I told myself I'd stay 3 years at Paramount, and I stayed 17 years. I was so fortunate to work with incredible talent.
I mean, this is the heyday of the studios, too.
It was
the
great.
Studios were actually making really interesting stuff.
Yeah, when I got there, Sherry Lansing was running the studio, and that's why there were probably 3 female production executives at the time, which ultimately, not long thereafter, I was the only female. But I do think that she really made a point of hiring more females than the average studio.
Yeah.
So I stayed at Paramount for 17 years and was able to work with incredible directors and producers, David Fincher and the Coen brothers and Adam McKay and Steven Spielberg and Peter Jackson on an
Which
animated.
one's your favorite
Director or project?
Of those guys you've named that we have heard their names once or twice.
Fincher.
Yeah.
I just challenging and my favorite.
Yeah.
Yes. I was so lucky and worked on, $20 to $200 million budgets. So every project had its, of course, politics and challenges, whether you were to meet 150 net or 14 net.
Going from the indie to the studio, you talk about these budget ranges. They're so astronomical, and obviously there's less and less of that range in today's current market. But what are the biggest key difference from your perspective between the independent experiences you've had?
Yeah, I can't speak too specifically to the independent world, because even though I produced, say, Killing Zoe and worked on a few independent films, the majority of my career has been studio pictures. So I can't really speak to that. But the process is not that dissimilar, whether for me, the lower end range as a studio executive was about 20.
Yeah.
And the higher was about 150 net. I did a few of those. It's really about casting the right team and establishing a relationship directly with the directors and of course the producers and navigating the waters. I say David Fincher, and we did a film called Zodiac, but we spent 4 years working on Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of exposure to him, and that was a movie with so many challenges. Whether it was Katrina, and we were the first movie to come in after after Katrina when, there was nobody untouched by Katrina, and brought 500 cast members back. Crew members back, pardon me. When you look back, sometimes it's the most challenging that are the most rewarding.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so then the chapter of being an executive ends.
So after 17 years, I had an opportunity to go to Sony. And it was hard to leave Paramount, but it was time for me to leave Paramount and make a change. They gave me a going away party where they roasted me and remembered every mistake, I swear to God, that I made in 17 years, specifically. It was great. And I went to Sony for a few years and had a wonderful experience working with Ang Lee. And we did a movie called Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk. It's a mouthful. We shot it in Atlanta, but then we shot in Morocco. And as you know, production executives aren't usually on the ground from beginning to end. We pop in and pop out. But in this particular incident, Sony wanted someone on the ground in Morocco from the moment we had someone there. It was a wonderful opportunity to work with such a talented director in a faraway land. We were on the border of Algeria, so quite exotic.
And was that your first time then being in a production for that length of time outside of the U.S. that really exposed you, I guess, to the magnitude that is, international filming?
No, I was hired to be the production manager on a movie called Love Affair, with Warren Beatty and Annette Bening. I was pregnant with my son, and I spent 3.5 months, maybe 4 months, in Tahiti, an island called Moorea, right across from
that
Tahiti.
sounds pretty lovely.
It was pretty lovely.
Was it? Okay, because some people are like, Tahiti, what a shithole.
It was fantastic.
Okay.
And we only shot, I think, 5 or 6 days there, but they needed someone to oversee.
So you were there for 3 months?
I was there for 3 months.
And you only shot for 5 days?
And we shot for 5 or 6 days, yeah.
Wow, that's the life.
Yeah. And then I had my son, and then they called me back to do the second unit.
But you went on maternity leave, or did you just...
I was freelance, so I finished the main unit shoot, and then they had second unit to do right after I had my son. So
how special.
Yeah, it was great.
You've obviously shot all over the world. You've been in Spain, France, Italy, England, Ireland, Jordan, Morocco, Greenland, South Korea, Tahiti, and you've scouted a bunch as well. And I guess I'm wondering, at what point in your career did you feel a big shift from when things were really being shot all over the U.S. to like starting to really go abroad more?
I've always loved to travel, so maybe I've manifested it, which I really did. For many years, I said, I'm going to produce in Europe. I'm going to produce in Europe. I just was able to work on movies or series that were either partially shot overseas or the entire project was shot overseas. When I had little kids, it was great to be able to do just a unit, for example, the Tahiti unit that we just spoke about. And then after my kids were older and out of college and I became freelance, I was able to go on location for
which is what you've been doing now.
What I'm doing now.
Yeah, you've been freelancing and going all over.
But a lot of my international experience started when I was an executive.
Yeah. And so, which brings us sort of to the present. You've done a lot of work in Spain, and I'm curious, what is it about Spain, of all the countries you've shot in, that you particularly have enjoyed? What aspects of that have been the most production friendly? What are some of your highlights from the projects you've shot there?
I've shot 2 projects there. One was a film called The Dictator with Sacha Baron Cohen, and it was based in New York. And then it was his first studio movie. And then we shot in Sevilla or Seville, depending on how you pronounce it, in Spain. And then the Canary Islands as well. And that was fantastic. But not a lot of production. It was maybe a week in each place.
Yeah, but that was also how long ago? It was over a decade ago, right?
I think it was 14.
Okay.
13 or 14. Yeah. And then more recently, I was hired during the pandemic. A little angel fell out of the sky named Netflix. And thank you. Thank you, Netflix.
Thank you, Netflix.
And asked me if I wanted to produce my first series called Warrior Nun. It was season 2, and they were shooting in Madrid. The first season shot in a city called Malaga on the coast of Spain, and the second season was shot in Madrid. I was hired as a creative producer. It was a female cast, and it was a male showrunner and a male line producer and male executive producer, and they really needed a woman female producer. So
yes,
I
they do.
volunteered.
They always do, don't they?
Exactly. Well, yeah, that's another podcast, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's this podcast.
Exactly. You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
So they did specifically need a woman. The cast felt that they just hadn't been heard enough. And
I mean, it's called Warrior Nun, and then you have
called Warrior
Nun
about these badass nuns.
Yeah, you need some badass evil females.
That's right.
Too. Yeah,
exactly. So
let me ask you, because this is really interesting. Is you were creative producer as a non-writing EP? Is that so? I get this question a lot, and this is also something I've been pondering. For those of us that have come up on the production side, oftentimes it seems that the industry likes to compartmentalize us and say, "Well, you're production, you're a line producer. You don't understand creative. Like, what job? How could you?" I know, that's why I'm bringing it up. How could you possibly speak both languages and understand? And we know that our job is inherently creative. It's always to support and service the creative in all kinds of ways. But the transition from going from being perceived as only a line producer or only a production executive to then get to step into a more creative producer role as a non-writing EP is something that a lot of people are curious about. And so I'm curious, just your thoughts on like how you made that transition. Certainly you were given the opportunity, but did you feel, and perhaps because you're already so far along in your career, you didn't have to deal with this, but like, did you have to fight to be seen and respected in that way, in those spaces? Or was that already a given because of you've been around for much longer and you have so much more experience?
No,
does that make sense? I've asked like 18 questions.
No, it's a very valid point. I was hired, I think, for yes, it was great that I had years of production experience, but I think it was more about my communication skills and how I had been on other projects where I had a cast of young actors. For example, the Ang Lee movie, it was a platoon. It was a war picture, and where I ended up helping support the cast. And it really turned into a creative producing job when I arrived in Madrid and established a relationship with the showrunner and the other writers and producers. So obviously on the set, and my experience in physical production. And as you were just alluding to, it's a very creative job, whether you're a production executive or a line producer. It's all about, for me, it's all about helping the director and or showrunner put their vision on the screen. And that's everything creative. Yes, it takes production experience, but it's ultimately a creative job. So it was quite an easy transition, and working with a number of directors, as one does on a series, that was a new experience for me. But I was able to sit on the set with the directors, and the showrunner was also directing 2 episodes and had his hands really full. And I think it was comforting for him to know that I was on the set while the line producer was out scouting and prepping for the next episode, to be his eyes and ears and communicate. So it all just kind of developed that way and fell into place. And I hope I get the opportunity to do it again. But also, my next job was as a line producer on a series. So as you know, series and feature films are quite different, just in terms of the structure and power structure and how they're made, obviously. So I feel very lucky that my first series, I was not the line producer, because I wouldn't quite know how to handle that.
Interesting.
Where when it came time to be a line producer on a series, which I did, called SEAL Team and Military Series, I felt very comfortable because I had done Warrior Nun.
Yeah. But back to shooting internationally, I'm curious, what it is about shooting outside of the US, particularly in Spain, because I know how much you've loved shooting there. I mean, what are the reasons that financiers, studios, everyone and their mother nowadays is going outside of the States, is going internationally, and is chasing these credits, these rebates?
Well, it's a loaded question. I agree with you. I think the majority, and I think the great majority of both series and features will be shooting outside of the U.S. Unfortunately, it's become very expensive. The unions have renegotiated, as everybody knows, and it's SAG, it's WGA, and it's the Teamsters, and it's the IA, and it's very expensive to have a union crew when you're budgeting 48% fringe. So for every dollar that you pay, you're paying another 50% on top of that. And those unions don't exist overseas. So that's a big price differential.
Yeah.
And as we all know, the bottom line is what gets the project greenlit.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have incentives, for example, Spain, where you get 25 to 30% back cash towards the project. It's not like the studio takes it and uses it for other purposes. It's directly applied to the project. 25 to 30% in Spain, and then you have upticks depending on where in Spain you're shooting. For example, the Canary Islands, you can get 45 to 50% on the first, I think, million.
54% on the first million and 45% anything after that. And the caps are pretty high as well.
The caps are very high.
Yeah.
And then in the mainland, it's 25 or 30% federal tax. And then local districts have upticks as well.
Mm-hmm.
For example, we were talking about Alicante, where the stages are in Spain, where some stages are in Spain, and how there aren't a lot of crew there. Well, that incentivized the government to give a uptick in, so to add a local rebate, which was created to allow filmmakers to bring in crew and put them up, to give them hotel and per diem, so that Alicante can become a production center. Ultimately, like all production centers, people will move where the work is.
Right.
But if it's not in a major city, it takes that to
takes time
to recruit.
Yeah,
and it takes time.
Yeah,
it takes time. Spain offers so much. The looks of Spain are extremely varied. Whether it's the topography, where you can get forest and you can get ocean and you can get desert, all within often just a 2-hour high-speed train ride.
Wow.
The architecture is varied. Even within Madrid, you can shoot a very contemporary city, and you can also shoot in old Madrid, which is just beautiful. The variation within the cities, but mostly within the country of Spain, and it's quite small. So it is easy to get around. And then what I was thrilled to discover is the crew and the quality of crew. They've been shooting American movies in Spain since the 50s. They were doing spaghetti westerns out in the desert of Almeria and Alicante. But the crews are wonderful. They, there's that stereotype of Europeans work to live and Americans live to work. Whether one believes that or not, what is very true is that the Spanish crews work very, very hard, but they also work limited hours and they get the work done. And it's always collaborative and it's always pleasant. Language is really not a barrier. All department heads plus one, if not more, in each department speak English. So that's not a problem. They have everything you need, whether it's, equipment. And then casting, depending on, what you're making, casting comes out of either all of the EU, which qualifies for the rebate, or a lot of casting in Spain comes out of London, which unfortunately that doesn't qualify, but it's a great local, quote unquote local talent pool. One of the biggest challenges shooting in Spain is if you're not, and this is true shooting anywhere internationally, but if you're not shooting Spain for Spain or Spain for Europe, and you're shooting, say, an American town or American city in, Spain for America, there's a challenge, and it may be obvious, but you're not going to find American set dressing and props and cars and all the and often the architecture. Although you can find neighborhoods that look American at the U.S. Naval Base, which is always a great resource, and looks like Americana.
Right.
On the other hand, you will find companies insisting on shooting in Spain because of the bottom line rebate is so attractive. I put together a plan for a movie that's set in the California desert, Utah, Nevada desert, a road picture this past year for a company, and it was a $20 million project, and a Spanish director and all the Spanish department heads were budgeting it. And we really could have shot the entire thing in the desert of Almeria and Alicante, but we did put an allowance to do a second unit in the States. Which could be easily accomplished, especially if it's just a second unit. So overall challenges, it can be difficult sometimes for the studio executives to have a project overseas because of the time difference and because it's not easy for them to pop over and have a meeting. And then, of course, the time difference.
Right.
When I did have big issues that involved cast and I needed, many people at Netflix input, it just turned out that I'd have my day in Spain and then I'd have my day in LA at night. And, you just put sleep to the side for 6 months. And that's just the way. The coffee's really good. That's just the way it operates.
And you're in Spain, so you're like, well,
and unlike the old days where when you're on location you shoot 6 days a week, that would never happen in Europe. I don't think it happens in America really anymore. But it's 5-day weeks, and it's 10-hour days. I mean, on a series we got 6 to 8 pages a day, shooting 7 or 8 days for an episode, and 10-hour days. And it's the way the crews used to operate.
I mean, but it's possible. And I think that
very possible.
The American way, I'm not convinced, is the best way, in terms of what you were saying, the balance and the sustainability of our crews. I mean, obviously, I've been privileged, if you can even call it that, but most of my experiences have been in Los Angeles. Actually, most of the films I've shot have been here, which is very unusual. I'm like a unicorn. But to your point, it's like, especially on the independent side, there's this spirit of like, we're all just going to embrace that it's hard and we're just going to like work ourselves to death. And you have, PAs without turnaround because there's no union rules for them and they're sleeping 4 hours and drive. Like, it's just insane when you think, again, about the health of someone who is starting out and entering the industry already from that place of like, yes, you have to earn your dues and you have to like pay your dues, earn your stripes and get the experience, but at what cost, And I think I know so many executives and freelance line producer friends who will get hired to try to make plans to keep projects in LA, to keep them in California, and then realize they literally cannot. It is cost prohibitive and it is financially irresponsible almost to create something here, to shoot something here, depending on what the world is that they're creating. And that is a bummer. It's really sad for the many of us, myself included, who moved here with a dream and a hope and have built networks of people here. And to realize that, we're in this crisis in the state of California with how production is continuing to leave the state. And even with the increase of the credit, that is still not even enough to compete with other states. We need at least $1 billion. I'm really concerned about it, honestly, because I think if we have this mass exodus of production from, again, specifically LA, all of the ancillary businesses that rely on us to be booming and thriving to survive are also going to die and wither, and what is going to become of the economics of Los Angeles, of the state of California. And I don't think that our senators and everyone is really thinking about that from that lens. As exciting as it is to be in Spain and get to go to all these places, it's like people still want to live where their families are, where their friends are, and be able to work in those places. So the duality of that is something I'm grappling with a lot, of like, how do we, in this moment of, it's a big lull in the business, it's very scary times, but it's also full of opportunity, right? But it just doesn't feel like that opportunity is here anymore for most of us.
Sadly, it's not. And I too want to see production in America, and of course Los Angeles.
Yeah.
It was as an executive at Paramount for 17 years. I think I did 2 movies in Los Angeles. I don't know how many movies I did, maybe 50. I'm just making it up, but probably 50 or more. And one was The Italian Job, which was scripted for LA and Italy. And the other was a film with Barbara Streisand, and she wanted to shoot it here, even though it was a road picture. We made it work in Los Angeles. But the point being is, production was driven away a long time ago, but never to this degree.
Right.
And it's the it's the high wages, and it's the low rebate in California. But even companies like Marvel, who have put their stakes in the ground in, say, Atlanta, they've picked up and moved overseas to London. And those are massive losses for U.S. shooting. So I, as positive and optimistic as I feel about shooting overseas, it doesn't negate the fact that it's happening in front of us, which is a loss of major production, both in Los Angeles and throughout the country.
Yeah.
It's really a shame. And I do think the only way it will come back is to do what you just said, which is to make it very attractive, lucrative rebates.
Yeah.
Because I don't think rates are going to come down. I think we're just going to have to, absorb that. But with a really lucrative rebate,
yeah,
it
but
pencils
beyond the
out.
rebate, I think it's distribution. I think it's everything. It's the whole ecosystem, because if you still have to back into a number to make something that should cost 2x that, but you have to do it for 1x to be able to even sell it in the market, because everyone is downsizing and merging. It's like, well, then what is the quality of what you're making as well, which is another question to grapple with, right? Like, there are certain price points where you can kind of make really cool, interesting art. And I would say that in the sub 10 million space, like, that's possible, that's doable. I know a lot of indies that can still stay afloat and shoot in LA, but again, like, the crew that fought hard to, get those union, the rate increases, they're not trying to do tier 1 level features for the rest of their careers. Everybody wants to graduate up, but it feels like the ceiling on your potential across the board for everyone is here. And similarly, we think of writers and more of the creative counterparts. The days of being a writer on a TV show that went into syndication, and then you could buy a house and retire if you wanted to. Nowadays, most of my writer friends who get on a series are still broke. They can't even afford to even consider buying a house. And so the reality of that shift in the last 20 years since I've been here is just been mind-boggling to see. And it's obviously sad and debilitating in a lot of ways, but I try to think about taking those realities into stock. But what is the upside? Where can we come together and really find a new model, find a new pathway? Because the industry has always been volatile, and there's always been these massive shifts that have led to these booms. And what is that next boom going to be? Is it AI? Is it virtual production? Is it like, what is that going to look like?
Yeah.
And how do we get ahead of it, especially as women? And women who work in the States. I think there's always going to be the allure of Hollywood, but Hollywood isn't production. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's the ritzy, glitzy part of it, but that's not what we do. I talk about this a lot on the podcast. Like, if you get to live in that, that's like 1% of your entire career, where you get to be a fancy person and do the fancy things that people assume to be what is the experience of working in this industry. But yeah, so I'm just sort of pontificating on that because it does make me sad, but I also don't want to just harp on the negative. I do think there's, again, a lot of possibilities. And I hope that this moment in time is a big awakening to everyone that has any power who is listening to raise their voices and help us figure out that way of how do we keep, if not all productions or huge productions that, again, are a huge financial risk to studios, these smaller projects, will we see the rise of indies again, where we can take creative risks? Younger audiences are clamoring for shows that were created 20 years ago. How do we service that audience? How do we make things at a price point that makes sense for the market and can still keep production here in LA or in the States?
I think the biggest element that can keep one here is if it's a movie star driven project and the
That's
star
where they
wants to stay here.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, that's kind of the most likely way, I think, to have a project stay. And it is a mass exodus, and I do believe it will come back. But I think this is unfortunately what it's going to take to get states to increase their rebates. Because I don't want to just pick on California.
When I was talking to Ted Hope a month or two ago, that was one of the things he said that really struck with me from the conversation of like, we have to be protective of our own exports now, of our culture and of our stories.
Mm-hmm. It's true. I mean, I think the biggest challenge, and it's a challenge wherever you shoot, is with the rise of cost of living, and in the States, the unions, the overall often above the line increases. The challenge is to deliver for the same price. And keep the integrity of the project and the creative integrity of the project. And that is why filmmakers will go overseas, because they can put that money on the screen, that difference in the money. And as a producer and as an executive, but especially as a producer, that's my goal. Of course, put together a sound plan and execute it, come in on budget and schedule, of course. Not that that's easy, but of course that's a primary goal. But equally important is to be able to deliver the quality of material that the studio is expecting for the same price, despite having to absorb increases. And also, just to make another point about budgets, et cetera, the cost of living overseas. Right now, I think the dollar is probably close to the euro. It fluctuates. It's usually, it's close to 1-to-1. But when you look at the cost of living in Los Angeles versus even a city like Madrid, the dollar just goes so much further. And that just translates to every department.
Makes total sense. Can you share any fun little anecdote of like a really crazy challenge that you had that you guys figured out how to overcome?
I thought it was exciting, and that was that on Warrior Nun, there was a scene that was scripted in the Prado Museum, and so we scouted all these museums that we would make, the Prado Museum, because nobody's ever shot in the Prado Museum. But you know what? We were determined to shoot in the Prado Museum, and we got in there and shot for a night, and it was especially with the challenges getting in there. It was very exciting. And then we took wings of other museums and kind of turned it into the other wings of the Prado Museum. But it's pretty exhilarating to shoot in iconic locations, whether it's here or overseas, kind of untouched territory.
Yeah.
And that's what I often look for as a producer, of like, let's do something that hasn't been done before.
Yeah.
Whether it's a location or, that's often usually locations.
Yeah. But I do off mic want to know how you figured out how to shoot at the Prado. So,
it's numerous calls to numerous.
Of course, it always is.
And I think ultimately somebody's uncle was a general in the army.
I love it. It's just to be a producer and executive, I think there's idea of thriving in chaos and the curiosity of like, here's a goal. It feels impossible. You're going to find every single possible way to get to that goal, whatever it is. I've had that where it's like, we need a very specific goat that's not indigenous to the United States. We need that goat. And you're like, I know nothing about goats. Yet by the end of the day, somehow you have learned way more information than one should ever learn about goats. And you have delivered where to get the freaking goat, So I love the idea that we take the impossible and make it possible. I love the challenges that we get to, like, the hoops we have to jump through to make things happen.
I do
So
too.
can you share a story or an example of something that you went through where you had to maybe go through that and got to the other side?
Well, I too love that, the problem solving of it. I mean, what we do as producers and as executives, we put together the most sound plan possible, but we all know that on day one, there'll be a surprise.
Yeah.
And on day two, there's another surprise, and it just continues, and it just keeps us in the problem solving mode. So I was shooting a military show called SEAL Team, and they were, when I came on board, it's season 6, and I was the only newcomer. And the production was looking at Spain and Morocco and Greece to shoot for the Middle East. We were bringing in live guns, which you cannot do in the EU, so that left Morocco. And I said, why don't we go to the Middle East if we're going to shoot the Middle East? So we did. We went to Jordan. Everything was exterior, of course, because you don't go to that far away place to shoot on a stage.
Yeah.
There was one particular scene that was quite massive. We were blowing up life-size military drones on a live base towards the Dead Sea, so right across from Israel. And I decided I was going to go actually see the drones. The drones, they were life-size, but we, as an art department, constructed them, and I wanted to see them placed on the runway. So I went out there and I saw them be placed on the runway, and it occurred to me, there's something called a satellite, and Israel's going to see these military drones that look photoreal being blown up on a live base. So
my goat story.
So
not as exciting. Got it.
It was the day before we were shooting it, and I called our local line producer, who had a direct link to the military, who were incredibly cooperative. They gave us everything we asked for and more. And I said, I'm wondering if somebody should call somebody and let Israel know that we're blowing up. He said, that's a really good point. I'm going to make that call. And we blew up those drones, and it was 127 degrees when we blew them up.
Wow.
It was the hottest
day ever.
Hottest day ever. And definitely
did anyone pass out? Did you?
No, you know what? They're so
used to it.
The locals were used to it, and the Americans were not. But we were well informed and educated about to stay hydrated. Yeah.
Well, good for you for seeing that. It was
fantastic. Wow. Well, I looked over and I thought, wow, I can see Israel right now. I thought, well, then that means they can see us, especially in that technology in the sky.
I know. I'd love to get a clip of that.
I have. I actually have it.
We should cut
it's
away.
Beautiful.
Should cut away to it.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I would love to share that. Okay, so that's amazing. I mean, talk about a challenge and having that foresight. I don't even want to know what would have happened if you hadn't had that foresight. It could have preempted a lot of things. But again, it's like, is that a creative thing to be thinking about that? It's not, but it is, because if you had not had that thought, everything could have come to a screeching halt and nobody would have known why. And it would have impacted the creative,
Yes.
So there's many tentacles of what it means to support the creative. And I like to drive that home because, again, this industry likes to make people feel like they should only occupy certain lanes. And I personally believe that that's wrong, especially as we head into this new world of the more versatile you can be as a producer, as a storyteller, the better you'll be.
And that's really the production and creative. It's not even a blurred line. It's almost as if there isn't a line because line producing is such a creative job. And the best creative producers actually know production.
Correct.
So
you heard it here.
Yeah.
I've been saying it for years, but Sara Spring is a giant of our industry, and it's true. I know when I started like flirting with tax credits and incentives, it can be very scary and daunting because different countries and places have different ways to apply and go through the process and what qualifies, what doesn't qualify. So can you talk us through quickly for those who are listening and are interested in really diving into Spain specifically, like what is that process like?
Well, first I should say rebates change all the time. So it's important, even if you shot in a country last year, to update yourself on the rebates because they increase, they decrease, they have sunset times, et cetera, et cetera. Spain, I have found, is absolutely the most user-friendly application process for the rebate. You go to the film commission, tell them what you're shooting, and you send them a budget and a script, et cetera, schedule. And one of the most important decisions one makes before they go into a foreign country is who the production service company is going to be. And the production service company, for those that don't know, are the local companies that provide the crew, and they provide insurance, and I mean most importantly is crew, but they also help with the application process at the very beginning. And many help with the budgeting process. I always will have a production service company help inform the budget. Even if I've done the whole budget or the studio's done the budget, I will always bring it to them before to present it to the studio. The production service company will go through the application process with you, and in many ways almost for you, to get the pre-approval before you spend a dime. Then it's approved before you step foot in the country. It's an easy process. You have an experienced accounting team that tracks all the eligible spend, and that includes through post-production if you're going to do any spending there. And a third person audits the spend and the rebate, and the cash rebate is sent to the company as soon as you're completed the audit, actually.
How long does the audit take from production wrap to, is it pretty quick?
It is. I don't want to say a number, although I'd say, maybe a month.
So that's pretty quick because I think, again, it's good to know, and why WPS, just to bring it full circle, is so great is because sometimes people think, we'll go to this place and it's great. And then someone can go, yes, but just know that it can take up to a year or 2 years to get your refund or your rebate or whatever it is because of XYZ reasons. So it's important to know what you're getting into because different countries operate differently in terms of the timeline.
Yeah. As a line producer, you're off the project a few weeks after shooting, and then the finance department at the company kind of oversees the whole rebate from the beginning to the end.
Yeah.
So I can't speak specifically how long it takes to get the rebate back, but it couldn't be unreasonable, or we'd all know about it.
Right.
It's just the way it works. And I can't emphasize enough how important that relationship is with the production service company. I think you have to do diligence beyond diligence in terms of checking them out, speak to not just studios who have worked with them, but also speak with filmmakers who have worked with them, because they need to satisfy everyone from corporate down to production.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
On the show and sharing a bit of your journey and your wisdom with me and the listeners.
It's a wonderful podcast, so it's exciting to be a part of it.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to the martini. Which I've rebranded. It used to be called the lightning round, but now it's just going to be called the martini. So we have the Martini 5, which are 5 fun questions that just take us out. So, are you ready? What's a song that teleports you to a happy place?
It was my first record album, and it was Raindrops Keep Falling in My Head by Burt Bacharach. I'm a huge R&B fan. So any song that Luther Vandross sings brings me to a happy place.
I love that.
So we'll take that over Raindrops. Right?
Okay. Yeah. What is the latest piece of art that moved you?
I saw a painting in an art gallery in Montreal a few weeks ago that just stuck with me. When you just walk away and it sticks with you and you think about it for a number of days. It was a beautiful painting. It was quite abstract, except for there were a couple of people walking in the snow, and there was a huge kind of, it almost looked like a crowd behind it. And then when you walked up, you saw it was quite abstract, but that just struck me. In terms of films that really amazed me recently, I saw Emilia Perez, and I was very moved by that film. I thought it was so original and almost impossible to explain to someone how creative it was.
Especially at a time when creative risks like that are not being taken. And a lot of people are like, oh, Emilia Perez. I'm like, this is a huge win. Like, celebrate it. It's a very ambitious film, and I'm here for it. I'm here for all of it, So, okay, fill in the blank. When I'm overworked, blank helps ease the stress.
Exercise and music. Preferably together.
Luther Vandross while exercising.
Well, yes, that's like a daily routine when I'm stressed.
What is one of the most worthwhile investments you've ever made? And it doesn't have to be financial.
Having children. And it's quite an investment, as you can attest to.
And lastly, you were talking earlier about mistakes and all the mistakes you've made in your career and how you were being roasted when you left Paramount. But what is one failure that you wouldn't be here without?
Oh, I was going to give you my biggest mistake.
You can give us that too. We'll take it.
It's big.
Yeah.
I was working on a film that shall remain nameless. Overseas.
Naturally.
And the studio, I was the executive on it, were promised, assured a 747 to go from a city in America to a city overseas. So I took it out of the budget. It was like $1 million. And for a product placement for this airline. And sure enough, a week before, it fell apart. And of course, my boss said, well, you're going to have to use the money to get a plane. But I had taken the money out of the budget because I had faith that that plane was going to be real. So that was the most expensive mistake.
$1 million mistake.
It was $1 million mistake. So
where'd you pull it from?
At the time, I didn't because I had no time. We figured it out at the end, a little bit here, a little bit there.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was just something I've never done to say, well, it's $1 million overage because it came up 10 minutes ago and you have to have a plane in 3 days.
Yeah.
Oh,
God. Nerve-wracking.
Failure that I would. I'm not pausing because I haven't had a handful of failures. I look back and I thought maybe it was a big mistake. I don't think I'd say failure. By going from one studio where I was very comfortable to another studio where it just, for obvious reasons, wasn't comfortable because I'd been at the other studio for 17 years. And it opened my eyes. And I don't think I would have gone out to the freelance world once my kids were out of college, which was initially the plan. But I don't think I would have gone out in the freelance world if I hadn't made that move to the studio and left my comfort zone. And I do love the freelance world as much as I thrived for years in terms of my happiness and what I was doing as an executive. I'm even happier as a freelance producer. So does that answer your question?
Yes, that answered my question. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
this
you.
Was lovely.
It was